Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity.
Hey there, and welcome to BIM Thoughts. Today, we have a very interesting group of people that we're interviewing. Carl and I are interviewing. Today, we have Sol and Jacob with Autodesk. Very, very excited to chat with them. Not every day do I get to chat with them, especially both of them in the same room. Well, virtual room, if you will. So I guess I will start with Sol because, sorry, Jacob, I rarely talk to him. And I feel like Jacob, we are like BFF comparatively.
I feel left out.
The typical BIM Thoughts question, define yourself.
Oh, good question. So hello, everyone, by the way. Defining myself, curious human being is probably my default answer for that one. I like everything. I like to try everything. I like to take everything. I like to walk on everything. I like to climb everything. To swim in everything. I like everything. I know it's a somewhat cop-out answer in some ways, but I'm a very curious human being.
I like that. I was going to say
explains a lot, right?
Yep. It's a very nice answer, and that explains a lot, as Dana said.
Right on the same mindset, cool. Right there.
and a little FYI. Oh, sorry, one quick little FYI. If you hear noise in the background, given this is the Zoom world that we live in right now, there's contractors banging on my walls, so apologies in advance.
Well, I bet my dogs will be louder at some point, so don't feel bad. We're in that world, like you said.
Yeah.
Jacob, define yourself.
Oh boy. I'm glad Sol went first. I'm really a problem solver at heart. Like, I like to find something that's broken and figure out why it's broken, figure out how it's supposed to work, take it apart 6 different ways and put it back together, hopefully so it does what it's supposed to. Be that a, clock that's across the room, or this Revit workflow that's not working, or some code that's not executing, or something along those lines. So leads to me helping a lot of people, which is probably good with my kind of role, but yeah, it's pretty much me in a nutshell.
So is there a tiny little part of you, Jacob, that kind of gets excited when it doesn't work when you put it back together? So you get to take it apart and put it back together a different way?
Every time. It's also like, oh, somebody sent me an email about something that's not working at like 11:30 at night. The laptop's still on. Let's see what I can do.
There you go.
One of those emails have been me.
That's true.
Well, no, I think that's super interesting. You both have very inspirational definitions for yourselves. And I think that is super interesting in the fact of how that lends into how we spend our daily lives. We're really lucky in that respect, right? That we've kind of evolved into this career path that allows us to be curious, to be problem solvers, to be support people that are, in this, kind of trenches trying to figure the things out of why people are having these problems and how to resolve them, right? Because that's the best part for me. I will say I get a little bit more frustrated when I can't figure something out, but that adds to how much excitement you experience when you figure it out, right? Like all of that frustration is like, it's like, oh my God, finally I got it to work, right? Yeah. So, I think that's a super interesting. Can you talk on a little bit, like just in terms of how you've gotten to this path?
Sure, I guess I'll go first. I just wanted to say that I also think that learning things the hard way is really, really, really good sometimes, because that sense of satisfaction you get when you finally achieve it is huge. And if something comes easy to you, you don't get that sense of satisfaction. It's 0% levels. So to your question, how I got where I am, interesting question. So I'm originally from New Zealand, if you can't tell by the accent. Have lived in Scotland and England and Canada, and now based out of Boston. So it's my 5th country. Have traveled to almost 50, so I go around a lot, and I've worked in most continents as well. Antarctica, not so much yet, but maybe one day, we'll see. So my path has really been feeding on from my previous answer out of curiosity. So I get bored pretty easily, and so historically, actually, Autodesk is the first job I've lasted more than 2 years at in my entire life, and I've had about 14 different objective careers to date before I got here, hence the curious side of things. And so it's all really led me to this position where I feel like it's a sort of like melting pot of all of those things coming together, where I can help people, which is something that I derive a lot of joy from. That I can push, the world forward and try and make a difference and make a change, and bring all those things together and really lean on every single piece of experience I have through landscaping and construction and industrial design and architecture and consultancy and all of these different things that I've done in the past.
Yeah. I guess I'll pick up next. So as a self-defined problem solver, I started off out of architecture school, got into that, enjoyed it because it's all about problem solving, right? And then got out into the field and found out that the problem I was solving was the fastest way to copy a DWG, or, the fastest way to manually renumber all the rooms in the drawing. And I'm like, well, this is kind of silly.
Most efficient way.
Yeah, that's true. Not necessarily, actually, because if you're in DWGs to begin with, it's probably not too efficient, right? So then I eventually moved on to working on, at a different firm, CBT Architects, sort of bigger scale projects, real BIM. And it was like, oh, this is great. All those problems that I thought were problems are no longer problems. Now I have new problems. Oh, Dynamo can solve that. Hey, now I've solved, those problems. And anytime someone's like, hey, I have this problem, I've been doing it for so long. And I'm like, that's not a fun one. Next forum post. That's not a fun one. Next forum post. But when it comes to something where it's like, yeah, that's totally new, and, sink my teeth into it. And that eventually led me to Autodesk, where they were looking for somebody with that kind of mindset. And I've been really fortunate. I didn't get to travel much before, but I got to travel some before the pandemic and meet a lot of really cool people and solve some really interesting problems. So pretty happy with that so far.
Very cool stuff. I guess the next question, and this is the loaded question, of course, the episode, as we can see up here in the top corner somewhere. So what's new in Dynamo? I know about a month, or maybe almost a month and a half ago now, we had Harlan and Sasha on here talking about the big release for Revit, 2022. And it was one of those releases where there was a ton of good stuff, no sort of earth-shattering big features, but a lot of little things that really make life, especially on our side as the technical people, using the product a lot better. And I know that a lot of times with Dynamo, that's a very similar case in how the two tie together. So maybe we can start there with what's coming for the 2022 Revit side of Dynamo.
Right. So lots of things, really, is the short answer. Some of them spanning, the little quality of life improvements that you mentioned, that a lot of came from the Revit side of things, but also some pretty big moves too. So we've got a bunch of different really cool things starting from the Dynamo 2.7 release. So just to quickly caveat, we on the Dynamo team make a release that comes out faster than what our host integrators take. So Revit is a host that takes Dynamo, or Civil 3D is a host that takes Dynamo. So we had actually released 3 or 4 different releases that Revit 2022 consumed to take. So we're now at the 2.10.1 version, and that is including content all from 2.7, 8, 9, and 10. So there's a bunch of really cool things in there, some really big plays, some not so big plays, and I can probably share screen briefly and just talk through them as we go. So there's some Dynamo core things, which means every single host gets them, and then there's some Dynamo Revit specific things too. So can you guys see my screen right now?
Yes, we can. And by the way, I always love your TLDR starting all your posts.
Yeah, that's for lazy people, me included. So.
Exactly.
So basically, from 2.7 onwards, there's a bunch of different things in here. I'm just going to scroll really briefly and just pick out the salient ones. So these posts, as Carl alluded to, actually follow a format. So it says there's a little TLDR at the front if you've got 30 seconds to figure out what's going on in release, and there's a little bit more juice to the rest of the post if you want to get into it, and sort of explains the differences between Dynamo Core and Dynamo for X. So in Dynamo 2.7, the big thing that we released really was the first phase of Python 3. So Dynamo previously used this expression of Python 2 called IronPython, which was specifically built for the .NET environment or realm. And now we're expressing also Python 3, and you get access to both. So if you want to use IronPython 2 like you did in the past, cool, keep going, keep doing your thing. And if you want to use this new version, which accesses all of the really cool libraries that are out there that do machine learning and a bunch of other really cool things, then you can actually do that out of the box now inside of Dynamo as well. There's 1 or 2 sort of steps to set up your own system. There's a couple of wiki links and things to jump on, but they're all linked here in this post as well, or in the series of posts. So Python 3 is huge. And if you guys want to jump into the meat of this, Dana or Carl, just let me know. We can get into some of the nuance. We're going to cover in brief a little bit about what's going on. But in essence, you have access to Python 3. That's really, really good. And then there's a little bit of a timeline around what we're actually going to do over the next course of releases, which we have done now, which is kind of fun to do. We also upgraded the graphics engine, so Helix, which is what we use to render the geometry in the background. Extensively, you won't see much difference, but there is performance gains, and it's cleaner. There's some better anti-aliasing, some better lines, and so on. And that's basically just an upgrade feature that came across, which is really cool. And then a bunch of little things as well, which is just the addition of some nodes, some performance gains, some stability increases, dramatic speed improvements in the case of the package manager dialog. I know when I was at AU last time physically, it was really, it's a couple of years ago now, it was about 2 minutes to actually sync up and download the nodal content. Now it's more like 10 seconds on the package manager. So it's pretty cool gains. And then also started improving some of the sort of fundamental, this is the quality of life stuff, but fundamental things that Dynamo has, which is the ability for it to start talking to, a language underneath design script in better ways, in cleaner ways. Now we can jump and do this, so feel free to jump in with me. And then some bug behavior. So I call out typically in a blog post any of the salient things that are really going to be either game changers for people or things that I think people should find out. But please do bear in mind there is also a series of release notes that contain usually at least 30 to 50% more stuff than what gets captured in blog posts. So that was the 2.7 release. All of that stuff is in Revit 2022. Then moving into 2.8, we also did way more improvements into the Python space. So if we move down, we now have Python 2 as the package on the package manager. So the reason why we're not actually shipping that ourselves anymore is there's some security vulnerabilities that come with older versions, legacy versions of content, and Iron Python 2 is no longer being maintained from a security perspective. So you as a user totally get the option to keep using it if you want to, if your firm is comfortable with that, if you as an individual are comfortable with that. But we, as a company, can no longer ship that out of the box. So you get a choice now to get that in the package manager. And what this means is you can still use any of your own Python stuff if you have this package installed ad infinitum forever. What we also introduced was this thing called a migration assistant. So for people who are maybe not so comfortable with staying on Iron Python, we introduced this feature which allows you to, in essence, upgrade most of your code, which is kind of cool. So it'll translate from Python 2 to Python 3 using this 2 to 3 Python library. And you have to, as a user, accept this because it's not going to capture literally everything. It's going to capture the majority of things. So we want you to sort of either make a copy, migrate it, make sure that it works and functions and behaves the way that you want. There's also sort of disclaimers and backup files that are created and a bunch of goodies at the back end too. And then if we move down further, we also had the ability to improve the Python experience. So we added white space characters inside of the Python IDE. This is something that has been a frustration for many people in the past. So Python doesn't behave very well when you use a mixture of tabs and spaces. And so historically, you kind of had to copy and paste that stuff out, put somewhere else to figure out that problem. And the error message that Dynamo gave wasn't so good. So in this instance, you can now toggle this on and very quickly see if there's a problem resulting from that. And the migration assistant actually converts every single tab to the equivalent in spaces, which is 4 spaces now as well, because Python 3 behaves better when it comes to periods of spaces than it does with tabs. We also introduced the print statements. This is another thing that people have been asking for a long time. So the ability to basically print any amount of string-based data to your console, just as like a test or a validation mechanism. So if you're working with the console and you're printing to it, you'll see that every single time that Python node executes. So then moving down, there was a bunch of different sort of improvements when it came to curves, and the ability for curves to sort of honor the hierarchical ranking inside of the library. So curves breaking down into sort of lines and arcs and things, and then coming back upwards. Some of the nodes that interop with those have been pretty much improved, especially in the context of polycurves. And there's some ongoing work that they're doing with polycurves as well. So notions of offset are going to behave better. Notions of sweeping are going to behave better, and so on. Also little quality of life things, like you can actually rename your node by double clicking on it now if it's a preview state. Previously you couldn't do that as well. So that's the stuff that's coming with 2.8. If I'm going too fast, let me know, please. If I'm going too slow, tell me to speed up. Either is cool. And then we can maybe get into the meat of this after I cover the sort of the TLDR of the TLDR, so to speak. 2.9 came through with massive improvements to the notion of how you actually build a graphic. So we released this experimental feature called Node Autocomplete. So similar to the way every sort of textual language has this ability for it to surface the potential things you could do after you start typing. Node Autocomplete is a way to do that inside of the Dynamo space as well. So this is currently in experimental mode. It's actually in the 2.12 going to be taken out of experimental mode because we've considered it landed. There's a lot of improvements that have happened in 2.11 and 2.12 on this. But what it means is you can enable or trigger this from any given input and output port now, previously just input. And it's going to tell you exactly what nodes from a type matching perspective can actually get placed into that node. So we see instead of having the 700 out-of-the-box nodes inside of Dynamo Core plus the 700 out-of-the-box nodes in Dynamo for Revit with a matrix of 1400 to the power of 1400, billions or trillions of different options, you now only have to choose from something that's actually going to be viable or potentially viable inside of that space too. So, if you have a sphere with the points radius, you're going to have maybe 10 different options to choose from instead of that 1,400 different options. So the notion here is around how can we lower the barrier to entry and improve the work experience for anybody using Dynamo, specifically targeting new users and intermittent users who come back and will have to sort of relearn to a certain degree how to start building graphs effectively. But also targeting advanced users because you're currently gated without Node Autocomplete by the ability to right-click, search, place a node, wire that node up and place it in the correct location. So what Node Autocomplete does is you just invoke it on a port. You choose the node you want, it's going to automatically place that and automatically wire that up to the port as well. So even if you're the fastest graph builder in the world using the old mechanism, you're probably going to be in the vicinity of twice as fast using Node Autocomplete as well. And it allows you to go through and sort of search through these features. We'll search through the subset of nodes that can come through just the same way any other search feature can. And this has been improved a lot, like I said, later down the line. So that's really cool. I'm really excited about Node Autocomplete. I think it has the potential to be a game changer when it comes to how people start building graphs and playing with graphs, which is really cool. Scrolling down in brief, we also improved the sort of performance of a couple of targeted nodes, in this case, curve.parameter for parameter point and point.prim duplicates, and they were massively increased in speed, so 35 times faster. A bunch of other nodes over the course of these releases that have done the same thing. So we're looking at targeting outliers in this instance. A TuneUp, a little plug for TuneUp. It's a really cool little extension that the team made. You can download that tells you how long a node took to execute, how long an overall graph took to execute. So what we were looking for in this instance is these outliers, like these nodes that are taking obnoxiously long compared to other nodes to execute. So these things are pointing to sort of deeper problems that we can then target. And it's only really through talking to the the customer base, the user base, on how they're using Dynamo at scale and in real world projects, they can actually find some of these issues too. So if you do see any of these outliers, please do sing out to us via any of the channels that you can find us on Twitter and via the forum or via the GitHub sort of issues register and to tell us about them, because then we can actually target them. And then a bunch of different other improvements to some sort of things as well, like integer wrapping and flexibility in the extension sidebar, so you can actually drag this out and not have a baseline width constraint. And then introducing some sort of workflow improvement nodes as well. So solids.separate means you can now actually get the makeup solids of any composite solid, which is a long time request from many different people, and the ability to do some other kind of geometrical applications around thickening with sort of vector orientations or normal orientations and ruled off solids and so on. So that's Dynamo 2.9 and then 2.10, so getting there at crazy speeds. Also contains Node Autocomplete improvements. I've basically touched upon that, which is really cool. Sidebar panel improvements, which means you can actually pop out every single extension that lives inside of that sidebar panel. You can have them set up on your windows on the left or the right or multiple screens if you wish, and they're going to honor that location too. So every single time you open up Dynamo and you have those extensions open, it's going to put them into the right kind of location. So you can have the documentation browser and the workspace references and TrueNut and any other extension you want running all at the same time, instead of historically when you only had to have one and it was sort of more tabular in nature. I did different sort of salient bug fixes when it came to, or addition of nodes and salient bug fixes when it came to adding in some sort of just quick workarounds. People got confused with the list.true for any and list.all true and list.all false. So we've added in some nodes that sort of get around that kind of space. Added shuffle and random seed values to every single node as well. So this is more for generative workflows. So you can start to actually make randomization that is trackable, targetable, and returnable too. It's kind of fun. And so really interesting shuffle behavior fixes as well. So the old list shuffle was actually based on the system clock. That meant that if you executed two nodes at exactly the same point in time, their shuffle would actually be identical as opposed to not identical, which defeated the purpose of shuffling. What we were trying to do, especially if you're trying to shuffle the same content. So you notice the old behavior is basically trying to shuffle from the same code block, you get exactly the same behavior every single time. And the new behavior is a way to get around that, but you can simply use a seed value to achieve the same behavior as well. And then some annoyances coming through from things like curve.offset used to behave in the way on the left, which is kind of arbitrary and random. It had some sort of random logic to it behind the scenes, but didn't really make sense to the user, and now it actually offsets it in cool kind of ways. As well as some node to code improvements and some cleanup on notifications and things. So this is a whirlwind on what is released inside of Dynamo Sandbox. The only other thing I wanted to show was everything that's released inside of Dynamo Revit. This came through actually in the point release, but I wanted to highlight it as well. So these are all of the nodes that got added. There was around about close to 100 additional nodes that came into the Dynamo for Revit environment halfway through last year. And these are also obviously out of the box available inside of Revit 2022 too. There's a bunch of really cool things that took inspiration from some of the community authors. So there's some rhythm nodes that migrated up in here. There's some nodes that came from the Code package, space stuff. And so this was all with the consent, and everybody was really excited to sort of help sort of thematically contribute to this kind of space. But there's a bunch of different things to do with sort of dimensions and documents and elements, family instances, and so on. What's really kind of cool is you'd start to understand what is going on with sort of joining, unjoining, all of these kind of cool operations, but also doing things around getting posts and getting and sticking elements and categories. So doing some pseudo sort of clash detection workflows in Dynamo now can be a little better than they were historically. Bunch of different pickups on what family is behaving and owned by what kind of room or space, the ability to get a bunch of different element types. So historically I used to like category.by name, or I still like category.by name, and you can do that now with element types as opposed to having the drop down. There's been some funkiness with that in the past. The floor types and roof types, obviously the floor and ceiling APIs have been released now as well, so there's some cool new nodes coming out. I'm not too distant future on that one, but this was sort of improving that space beforehand. Elevation markers, family document stuff, group stuff, selection stuff is really interesting to talk about. So you can get every single room by its different status. So this is placed rooms, unplaced rooms, not enclosed rooms, and redundant rooms. They're all for sort of room expressions come through now as well. And the ability to do select model elements by category as well. So you can simply choose the category you want, do a drag selection inside of Revit, and only pick out the things that are relevant to you in terms of the category here, which is kind of fun. So previously you had to do some sort of filtration event after the fact. I mean,
I think you're showing still your web browser. I think you're trying to show.
Oh, sorry.
Something else.
My bad. Sorry, team.
No Zoom gets you every time.
Posted in chat.
Zoom gets you every time. Exactly.
There we go.
Okay, so remember everything I just said, basically. But no. So there's a bunch of different cool things. Sorry, I was supposed to show this. Wasn't supposed to show the other thing. And there's a bunch of really cool nodes. Have a look at it. There are around about 100 different nodes. Some really cool stuff, like I said. So you can basically listen. The words will still wait. Some really cool nodes. The ones I hovered on were options around sort of family instances and things, options around sort of elevation markers, family documents. Selection has got some really good bump ups. So the ability to pull rooms by status, like I said. A whole bunch of different things to work with groups, which is kind of fun. Selecting elements by ID. So if you've got elements passed out to an Excel document or an SQL server or some external space, you can now pull that back in. Media, some space nodes, viewports, warnings. So this was kind of the bang package that John put together. That's been replicated back into out of the box notes as well. So apologies for the technical profile. My bad on that front. But let's jump into some of the stuff. Kyle, Dana, what do you guys want to know about?
Well, I think before Dana gets on here and starts asking about which nodes to play with, which is the exciting stuff, I do have a quick question about with the 2022 release. Have you guys tied into any new products? I know there was Civil 3D and Foreman and those things. Is there anything new that we can now interact with Dynamo?
New-ish is the short answer to that one. So yes, the robot structural analysis now has an out-of-the-box Dynamo implementation as well, which is really, really cool. So previously you did have the capacity to work with robot, but it was kind of in an out-of-process way. And now it is still technically out-of-process in the way that they interrupt with data, but it is now accessible via robot internally as well. So you have the ability to play in that space. Very cool, very excited to have them part of the team.
No, I'm super excited. I mean, I think Jacob certainly knows based off of our conversations some of the frustrations that I've had, and just one of them being space boundaries that are being shown right here. Recently I've been trying to find some space boundaries and make logic around space boundaries, and it's just not really that easy. So I'm really looking forward to playing around with those. Path of travel, obviously something I play around with pretty heavily with my occupancy workflows and different things like that. One thing I want to ask about is more about kind of backtracking a little bit back to some of the package related stuff and the management of packages, because I'm a little biased given my role at Smith Group and what my role entails. But that is actually probably the biggest headache when it comes to me having to manage Dynamo, is managing the packages and making sure that if a new package comes out, that it works with all the scripts that I have before I publish it to everybody, and that everybody has the packages. And luckily there's Orchestra. Orchestra is fantastic. It does a really great job of making all of that cloud-based and getting it accessible. But I just really, it's a headache. It truly is. And somebody who really wants to just be writing Dynamo scripts and talking to all my engineers and architects and all of the people at Smith Group about how I can make their lives better, right? Because I'm just like you guys. I want to problem solve. Yeah. I'm a nurturer, though, also at heart. I want to take care of everybody and make everybody's lives better with all of these problem solving and curiosities that I have. Okay. And I think everybody at my previous firm, anybody that I've supported would testify to that. And I'm very much an advocate for them. So I can totally understand when they're super frustrated and a script that they have doesn't run because their packages aren't loaded, because the Dynamo folder doesn't even exist on their C drive yet. Those types of little frustrations are the types of things. I love Dynamo. Dynamo DC, huge advocate. You guys know Dynamo. I get called that now.
So was your question what we're doing about it, or what we have done about it?
Towards some of the package related things that have changed within the environment of Dynamo.
Yeah, so a lot of what we've done to date has been sort of improving the package manager itself. So there's package manager service, and that takes a lot of work to maintain. But part of that was the slowness I mentioned back at AU a couple of years ago, around about that time frame. It was about 2 minutes, maybe even longer, to actually sync up and cache that data for you to be able to pull from. So that's been improved, as well as a lot of the back-end stuff that the customer or end user doesn't really see in terms of security and privacy and all that kind of stuff, but it is actually really important and really relevant. So that stuff has been worked upon. In terms of managing packages, we actually have some active work going on right now looking into dependency conflicts and how we can better serve those. That has been worked on by one of the teams here right now, which is really cool. That is a tricky problem generally in software. It's a tricky problem in terms of what gets loaded when and in which order. So if you're familiar with, say, Long Newton's Dynashapes package, that has a dependency on Mesh Toolkit. He had to actually rename part of that to make sure it loaded in the right order. And we're making strides to try and improve those kind of sort of experiences. So it's going to mean that the end user sees the benefit of that in terms of less frustration. It means that the package author is going to see some benefit in terms of being able to actually better execute their vision and what they want users to be able to use. But in terms of sort of targeted moves, we actually have scoped out some thoughts around that for coming into next year as well. So work that's not currently released in Revit 2022, but work that is on the burner and very much in our thought space. So I hear you, Dana, I hear your frustration. I'm a user as well. I have the same frustrations. And in terms of managing Dynamo, managing that experience, that is very much something that we're trying to tackle from the foundational perspective right now. Because sometimes there's sort of surface level issues that we can fix, and sometimes there's very foundational issues that we can work with. And so the foundational ones are harder. They're a lot chippier. They're a lot meatier. Some of them are domain problems, not just Dynamo problems. And we're looking to try and resolve some of those to make the other surface things a lot easier for us to resolve later. So it's kind of like a little bit of a cat and mouse sort of chicken and egg scenario to a certain degree.
There's also the graph dependency workspace references manager that's been put out. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
It's definitely been huge.
It's not going to help people with Dynamo Player necessarily, but they'll run it. They'll see like the warnings that pop up, and then they'll know to hit the edit button, and they'll open it, and then we'll say, hey, you're either missing something or they won't. And that's the thing. Like if they won't, just like the transition from doing stuff sort of computation, or between like transitioning from CAD to BIM, right? It's an uphill battle to teach the users how to learn to use the tool. There's a similar uphill battle that we're all facing in terms of teaching users, like, yeah, we've provided this thing. Maybe there's some issues, but just like in CAD, if your XREFs didn't load, after a while, you'd learn to go in and say, okay, XREF, type it in, and then reload. Just like in Revit, you'd go to manage references, load it in. Dynamo's no different, and this is just enabling that a little bit easier. So, yeah. Hopefully we'll see that start to fix more stuff.
You don't have users that hit every time they open up a Revit model, instance needs coordination review, and never question what that is?
Oh, I'm certain that those people are out there, but that's where we get into, like, you know, monitor user behavior to sort of find out what those problems are so that you can fix those things, right?
Totally.
Like, part of our job in sort of the problem solving is also the education. Like, your job is going to be easier. You're not going to have to spend all the effort at once. Like, hey, everybody, pencils down, the model's unusable. We got to clean up all the warnings because there's 175,000 of them, right? So nobody's getting any work done and we're not solving the problems we want. If instead we kept that sort of cleaning that up, we'd all still be moving smoothly along. And yeah, it would have taken us 10 minutes extra in every day. But, and this is sort of the same sort of aspect to some extent.
Yeah, and to jump on that a little bit, so we do recognize that it doesn't work in Player right now. There is active work also underway to explore that space and to figure out how to make it better for that experience to be surfaced. There's some really, really cool things coming down the pipe to enable that. So like I said, there's chicken and egg scenarios. So graph metadata and the ability to put descriptions and images and things into your graph from a metadata perspective actually enables that too. So we're looking into that space. It's very much happening. There is active work on player development to improve that space.
Yeah, and it's a big issue too with the generative design workflows too, right? Like, you can imagine how bad it might be through Player, how worse it would be through generative design, where we need to go through and just run a new version of that study. So we're already starting to see some of that stuff pop through.
And then
expansion, right?
Yeah, and then on the Workspace references, we're doing work also, funny enough, actively right now on a second phase on that too. That'll tell you every single reference that your graph depends upon, so not just packages. So you'll be able to understand, like, if you have an Excel document or a Revit file or an external image or whatever the case may be. The first pass is just going to surface that information, so you as a user get the choice on what you want to do with that information. And then later down the line, we're going to look into more holistic ways to ship data. But it's tricky because we don't want to copy data ourselves, because then you're just going to get bloat on your machines, and we don't want users to not understand the ramifications of these choices. So there's a little bit of finesse that's required when it comes to sort of navigating this space, and most of it we try to give and enable the user as much as possible to make those business.
Well, and I think going back to kind of what Jacob said about educating our users, you know, and I think teaching them about how computation can benefit them, right? How it can solve all of these problems that we've tried to solve, and, you know, all of these different types of things, right? I keep on saying, like, have you seen my Autodesk University course? You know, like those sorts of things. Problem solver right here. But with that being said, how do we get out to the masses? The people, unlike us, who care about technology and pushing the buttons to where they can't necessarily be pushed. The people who don't even push the button, they just cancel out of it because they're like, I don't even want to read that dialog box. You know what I mean? Like, how do we get to those people?
It's tough. That's an absolute ongoing battle, right? You're never there is no silver bullet there, right? And to some extent, there are people at Smith Group who have not moved past probably pen and pencil somewhere in the company, right? And how do you sort of reach out to them? So the rising tide sort of lifts all ships. You can't concentrate, and a lot of the companies come at, like, we're going to roll Dynamo out to the world. We've got 5 users who are going to support 500 people, and they're going to do all our graph running. That's a recipe for disaster, right? You instead need to take a percentage and work from the ground up. And yeah, those 5 users can start to enable the more advanced stuff and supporting the people who are down at the base, but you really need sort of a base to that pyramid. Otherwise, your pyramid's only as tall as the 5 users. And you'll eventually see, if you sort of tackle that and bring those people who are closer to the, you know, the boots on the ground, so to speak, those users will start to say, wait a minute, this was so much faster, and I got to spend time solving the problem I wanted to solve and spending the time where I wanted to spend it once they use that. So there are a lot of things we've sort of undertaken to sort of help train people up. A bulk of my job is basically giving accelerators or webinars to companies to be like, hey, give me people who want to learn Dynamo, and I'm going to walk them through right from the ground zero, right? Because if you start through like, hey, here's how to use Python, everybody's just going to check out, right? You've got to start with like, what is a string? What is a number? What is a list? Okay, now that we've defined those things, what can we do in Revit? Or what can we do in Civil 3D? And that's where you really start to see the bulk of that.
I would say, I would add to that and say that like curiosity and passion come into it, right? Like what do people want to do? Because nobody's ever going to learn something they get forced to learn or try to go down a path they get forced into. So for me, I was like, well, Revit's great, but it doesn't do everything I need. So what else can I do to try and improve the space? And I got super excited at the outset of just coloring things. Like just pull my doors and color them. If they're missing a parameter, just color them red. Done. And that means I can also take that model and give it to somebody else and say, just go look at this view. And if there's anything that's red in here, it's probably missing some information that you need to then go feed in. And that graph was like 10 nodes or something, 5 to 10 nodes. It wasn't that scary. And it was something that got me really excited about the power of automation and computation. Because I was working on a large scale project at the time in the Middle East with metro stations out of Qatar, and it was massive amounts of data flowing through those models and massive changes happening all the time. So like a human being is relatively fallible if you're trying to manage all that change. And so leveraging and leaning on the computer to do some of that was really helpful.
Well, and I think that kind of brings back to what Jacob said, kind of a double-edged sword. 5 years ago, 7 years ago, we just wanted people to know that Dynamo was out there. And, over this time, a lot of people now know that Dynamo's out there. You go to any conferences, Dynamo's the big thing we're talking about. So a lot of people are now aware of it, but not everyone knows exactly how it works. So now it's to Dana's point, it's like, hey, you do Dynamo, right? Well, just make this model happen, or just do this, or just do that, where they don't understand the back end. And that's where Jacob, starting from the beginning, not going right to Python, but starting from the beginning, they understand how it works, just like they learned how Revit works versus how AutoCAD works. But then they not only understand that they can improve what they need to do with Dynamo, but that Dynamo isn't the answer for everything. So that they sort of pick their lines. And I think that's the stage we're at now, where we've started the education, we've got a little more education, but we still got a ways to go to get there. But it's a long ways from where it was, just 5 years ago.
Very true.
Sorry, I'm like starting to take notes because I have like so many things to say. Gosh, like I don't even know how to keep up with all these thoughts that I have running through my head. No, I shout out like little, I guess, what do you even call it? Like a plug, I guess, shameless plug to my YouTube channel, Dynamo BIM, right? Where I love teaching Dynamo, right? I love to tell people like how it can benefit them. And typically that is like through, first, let me walk you through a schedule, and then comparing like what we did in the schedule to what we're doing in Dynamo, right? Like the logic isn't really that different. Trying to help them understand the going from this interface to that interface. Like, how do we even do that? And the advanced searching and different things like that, they're going to help me teach people so much, right? Like the fact that I have to type element.get param, I think maybe even the M like stops it from working, like those types of things make it so hard to teach, because now I have to go talk to the API and why I have to type, it's just like, it breaks down 7 steps of learnability. But those types of things are amazing. And I'm so happy to hear that those are coming out the pike. And I think that the way that I try to get to the users and try to keep them within the Dynamo player interface is by trying to, one, make better inputs, right? Whether that's through number sliders and get item at index and different things like that, or really logical outputs, right? Where it's saying actually a conditional statement fed to a watch node that will actually feed a code block that says there is no parameter by this name, or different things like that, rather than me getting the call, right? Because that's what's going to happen. Nobody's going to click the pencil, Jacob. I'm sorry. Nobody's going to do that. And if they do, they're going to open up Dynamo and they're going to be like, what the heck is this? And they're going to close it. at least currently. Hopefully in 5-10 years, we can see that being different. But I think how we get there is getting people to run 25, 30 scripts in a week and then saying, okay, wow, this has really become part of my daily kind of workflow, right? Now that I'm doing this on a day-to-day basis, it would benefit me to go ahead and learn this to a further capability. Maybe I should go ahead and watch those Dynamo shorts on, how to learn Dynamo, and, so forth. But I think that there's building blocks, in terms of how we get people to even master schedules. I would love it if all of my Revit users would master schedules, itemizing formulas, conditional statements, conditional formatting, those types of things. Like just learning that atmosphere would help me teach you Dynamo. You know what I mean?
Well, go ahead. Sorry, I was just gonna say the other thing that comes from that is kind of building on what Sol said as well. The idea that we can develop the product to do certain things, but until we get that real world feedback. So as you're going through this and people are using Dynamo Player and they're running into issues, it's conversations like this and on the forum and through Twitter where we get that feedback that maybe we thought it was going to go left. Remember way back when it was only Twisty Towers that we did at Dynamo, and we've come so far from then that this type of feedback sort of brings that in. So I think that's helpful. But sorry, go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I was going to say the one thing you have to be careful with sort of over relying on, hey, click the button in Dynamo Player and it's done, is that users will become reliant on the few power users who do the development. And they'll eventually get to the point where, projects expecting it to just work. And if their workflow deviates and it doesn't just work because it's deviated, the power users are going to have to stop everything they're doing to sort of put it back together. And so it works if you have that base of users who can start to do those basic edits. But if you don't build that up sort of in time with building those core graphs, you're basically building a bottleneck into the firm's adoption in terms of the man hours that are available. And that's really sort of the concern, because eventually, like every piece of technology you produce, whether it's a block in AutoCAD, a family in Revit, or something else, is a new degree of technical debt you have to take on, right? And that technical debt can be as simple as every year we have to upgrade the family to the new version and make sure it works and make an edit. Or it could be as complex as, now that I've decided to use these 5 different packages, I have to figure out how I'm going to deploy Bakery, Clockwork, and Arculab out to every user in the office. And that's a very, very difficult task unless you're going to sort of invest in a tool to do that. So meanwhile, at the other end, if we taught the users to take care of that technical debt on their own, just like that XREF piece, the problem goes away, right? So you have to sort of take that sort of big scale push. Otherwise, you can really put yourself kind of behind the 8 ball in the long term.
That's called job security, Jacob.
That is called job security. There is that.
With that being said, we are reaching the top of the hour, and I know we've got to wrap up. This has been amazing. We definitely got to get you two on here again to do some more fun stuff on the back end. But before we call it an episode, and as Bill would say, episode, is there anything that Jacob, Sol, you'd like to have as your final thoughts for the episode?
Good question. I would just say, honestly, it's about curiosity and passion, at least from me, in my perspective. And if you're curious about doing things in a better way, and you're curious about understanding what's out there, and you want to do better, and you want to be more efficient, and you want to be more effective, then Dynamo is a place that can do that for you. And if you take a little bit of time at the front end to just dip your toe in the water and start to understand some of the basic concepts of how it works, you're going to very quickly reach this inflection point where you can then sort of basically ski down the slope and find your way. It's not actually as hard as you think. And there's some really good resources out there to help you, such as Dynamo and the Dynamo Primer, and the Dynamo Forums, and Jacob and I are actually running a Dynamo Office Hours series as well. So go and search that if you're curious too. All of these things are aimed at really lowering the barrier to entry for people getting into Dynamo. And the notion of compute in general, or automation in general, is something that's going to become more and more prevalent inside of our industry, and more important to sort of wrap your head around, at least conceptually. You don't have to be a person necessarily who does it all, but just to understand how it works is really powerful.
Yep. Yeah, I sort of piggyback on that, is that this is the next wave of technology, right? Like you're not going to get into machine learning and AI in practice unless you have enough users who sort of understand the basic levels of compute, right? And that could be as simple as, Dana, to your point before, like setting up a formula in a schedule, or a Dynamo graph, or a Dynamo graph that just consists of 6 inputs and one custom node that just works, right? All of those things sort of matter. But as you start to scale that up and you want to get into that bigger stuff, you're not going to be able to rely on just a few individuals. You really have to start to democratize it, just like we did with BIM before it, and just like we did with CAD before that.
And the final thought is yours, Dana.
My final thought is thank you both. Honestly, I know that I sound like a critic. I have a lot to say. I have a lot of opinions. Jacob's not new to that, but he knows that. But he knows that I am a huge fan of Dynamo and what you guys do with the forums and making the packages accessible to the public and everybody able to load those up, and the community involved around Dynamo, I think is just so important. I was joking with Jacob the other day about how I sent Taco Pover a Dynamo forum DM. Like that's how I contacted him and actually introduced myself to him. So thank you for that, and allowing this community to grow in that way, because it is, with the primer and the forums and different things like that, it is a truly wonderful community to be part of.
Yeah, I'd reflect that back on you both as well, and everyone else in the community, right? Because we wouldn't be here without you either, right? This is really like this beautiful sort of culmination of many different passionate people and passionate spaces doing really cool things together. And Dynamo really is the community in many ways. Like, yes, it's a technology. Yes, it allows you to do things, but it really wouldn't be, a 20th, a 100th of what it is today without the community. So thanks to everyone who's listening. Thanks to you both for interviewing us today.
Yeah, thank you.